Julie Flygare, and I've talked a lot about data. What about the Red Sox? Anyone? Well, I graduated from Brown University at age 21, and I moved into the Fenway District in Boston, just 3 blocks from Fenway Park. Dream apartment. But one of the first nights I was sleeping in that apartment, I awoke in the middle of the night to hear a burglar breaking in through the window in the living room. And then I saw my door open, and a man with his arms stretched out towards my neck, lunging at me. All I wanted to do was run away or kick him or scream, but the strangest thing, I couldn't move to respond. I just lay there totally terrified, thinking, what is he about to do to me? Next thing, I looked up again, and he wasn't there. And now I could move. So I tiptoed out of my bedroom door and looked for him in the living room. There was no sign of a break-in in the window. And then I thought, my roommate's still asleep. How could she be asleep? It was way too loud of a break-in. So I concluded that there wasn't a burglar, which is, of course, a really good thing, right? But at the same time, it didn't seem like a dream either. I'd had plenty of dreams before, and this was way scarier and much more realistic. I went back to bed happy that there wasn't a burglar, but really unsure where this man had come from and where he had gone. A few weeks later, I actually was just laughing with my roommate in my living room of my apartment, getting ready to go for a run in beautiful Boston along the Charles River. And as we were joking about something, my knees slightly buckled under me, almost as if someone poked behind my knees, but no one had. I said to my roommate, oh my God, did you see that? My knees just did the weirdest thing. She said, no, she didn't see anything. This kept happening every couple weeks, always when I was laughing. This slight knee buckling, but it got worse and worse. And when I was holding on to a glass of wine at a party and something was funny, my glass almost slipped out of my hand. So these random incidents kept happening, but I didn't know what it was, and I asked people, friends, family, doctors, and no one was quite sure. At age 22, I entered law school at Boston College, and I had another problem. I'd always been a pretty determined person, but I started to decide that maybe law school wasn't for me because I was having a really hard time getting through classes. We were typing on laptops now, and so I would get sleepy during the middle of class. I would try to go to the bathroom during class to wake myself up. And then I'd look at my notes at the end of class and see half words, celebrities' names mixed in with property law. It really didn't make sense. And I really didn't think of it necessarily as a sleep problem, as more of a willpower issue. I thought I somehow wasn't cut out for law school. But at the end of my first year of law school, when I couldn't drive 15 minutes to school in the morning without feeling super tired, I realized there was no more excuses. When I finally found the word narcolepsy, I thought, oh, no, I don't have narcolepsy. That's just a joke about someone falling asleep in the middle of a sentence or while standing. That's not me. But then I read the symptoms of narcolepsy for the first time. Turns out it's a neurological disorder of the sleep-wake cycle, including excessive daytime sleepiness. Okay, definitely was having trouble with law school. Cataplexy, which was defined as this loss of muscle tone with emotions like laughter or annoyance. It was exactly what was happening with my knees and with my arms. And then hypnagogic hallucinations and sleep paralysis. And when I read about people's experiences with those symptoms, I realized that was just like the burglar that had come. And the burglar hadn't gone away. He kept coming in the middle of the night to terrorize me. So together, within a few seconds, really, of Google searching, I knew this is what I had. I lucked out. There was a specialist at Beth Israel, which is also 3 blocks from my apartment in a different direction. And so I was able to go and see one of the best specialists in the world. And I had a 24-hour sleep study and was diagnosed with narcolepsy with cataplexy 4 days after my 24th birthday, at the very beginning of my second year of law school. I remember my doctor was so excited because my test results were just that weird. I'd gone into REM sleep so quickly in all 5 of my naps that was just so fascinating, and he couldn't wait to tell his students and show them this is what narcolepsy is like on paper. I thought, this isn't so cool. I don't really want to be a good patient with narcolepsy. I want to be a good law student. But at the same time, it was really validating. Something really was happening. Next, we started talking about treatments. He said I was going to maybe take a medication once when I go to bed and halfway through the middle of the night. I said, oh, no, no, no. That sounds crazy. And I couldn't drink alcohol. Oh, no, 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 no. But at the same time, that cataplexy, that loss of muscle tone, was getting worse and worse to the point where a few days before being diagnosed, my boyfriend at the time had actually carried me to bed in his arms because I had no muscle tone. So I thought, well, I need to walk more than I need to drink alcohol. I guess I have to try this medication. But see, I guess the thing is that I thought this was going to be a little road bump. I thought, okay, I'll get narcolepsy, I'll take treatment, I'll be better by the time law school, the second year starts, and I'll proceed on my journey as planned. And this road bump started to seem like a really bumpy road. The treatments did improve my symptoms, but then there were side effects, things like anxiety. I had no idea what anxiety even was until I realized it's this cloudy feeling of awfulness, the world's gonna end. And it just was a much harder experience than I realized. At the same time, I didn't get my law school dream job at the big law firm, and my boyfriend at the time from law school broke up with me, saying we weren't having fun anymore. And he was right. A few months into diagnosis, things were really not very fun. I felt like I was watching a nightmare of someone else's life fall apart, but it was my own. Worst of all that, though, was I was actually excited to tell people when I found what I had. Hey, I figured it out. All those mysterious things that were happening to me, it's narcolepsy. But I wasn't ready for people's reactions. Some people changed the subject quickly. Friends of mine looked at me like I was a zoo animal. Some people laughed in my face. I came to realize that my very serious neurological disorder shared the name with something that was socially acceptable to laugh at. I got really passionate about health law and health policy while I was in law school and started studying to try to understand why there weren't better treatments. But I really just stopped telling people publicly. I figured out I didn't really like how talking to others went. So I became increasingly isolated and mad as hell. I would drive home from law school at night in my car and scream at the top of my lungs with a rage I'd never felt before in my whole life towards anything. I hated narcolepsy more than I'd ever hated anything in my life. I realized when I graduated from law school, we were really caught in this catch-22. We didn't like these misperceptions of narcolepsy, so we stayed silent, perpetuating misconceptions and our silence. Somehow the cycle had to break. And I thought we could make some great policy changes, but we really had to change people's perceptions of narcolepsy first in public. So when I graduated, I moved to Washington, D.C. to advocate for narcolepsy at NIH and FDA, and I decided to write a memoir of my experiences to open people's hearts and minds to the real condition. Well, when I wanted to write a memoir, I thought I could do this kind of like from under a rock. I didn't think I had to really get out there and tell people. But it turns out you really have to get in the public eye. So I had to start talking to the media and going to med schools and talking about my experience. And it was crazy. I'd like to say I caught the advocacy bug, which is the best chronic condition I've ever got, that I could tell my story and people actually thanked me. And these are the same stories that my friends and family seem to not really want to hear about. I went on to found Project Sleep, a nonprofit to make sleep cool. If that's possible, I'm going to try. We have the Jack and Julie Narcolepsy Scholarship. We give scholarships to students with narcolepsy. The Sleep In, a challenge to sleep in during National Sleep Week. And Raising Voices of Narcolepsy is a new leadership program we're creating to help people tell their story. About 4 years into being an advocate publicly, in 2013, I got word of this FDA initiative called the Patient-Focused Drug Development Initiative. Narcolepsy was on a list of 39 diseases to be considered for this program. They were going to accept 20 diseases into the program. They wanted to hear what the public thought about this. So living in DC, I marched myself right down to FDA to check out their campus and to go to this initial meeting. I quickly realized it was important because there was a lot of really important health lobbyists and leaders of organizations in that initial meeting. I thought, ooh, I guess people do care about this patient-focused drug development initiative thing. So I put in my voice as a person with narcolepsy at that meeting and led a campaign for other patients to say we should be part of this program. We were chosen as one of the 20 diseases for the initiative, and on September 24th, 2014, we had our narcolepsy meeting at FDA. There was 10 patients on 2 panels answering questions from the FDA, and about 100 people with narcolepsy and their loved ones in the audience, and 500 people via a webcast. This was a program record, by the way, for the FDA. Even though we were a rare disease, we actually showed up quite strongly, and we're really excited to tell our perspective. One of the most interesting things happened towards the end of the meeting. The program's director, Dr. Mullen, asked us, what would be your short list of things you would most want taken care of by a drug? What are the very most important things? Because narcolepsy does have this list of various symptoms. It was weird because honestly, no one had ever asked me that before. I've been a vocal advocate for a while, but what did I want? From my perspective, I feel like we're always just kind of getting what we get. So people's responses, the first thing people said was excessive daytime sleepiness, which really makes sense because that's the most common symptom of narcolepsy. But the second thing that people most said was brain fog, cognitive issues, memory loss. This was quite striking to me because you haven't heard me talk about that at all. It's not on the symptom list of narcolepsy, it's not in my infographics, but it was the second most important thing over some very scary and terrifying symptoms of narcolepsy. So I actually incorporated it into something I was working on at the time to create a mobile app for patients. We could have a diary entry where people could enter 2 things about their experience daily. And I was having a hard time picking out which 2 things, but after this meeting I realized it should be excessive daytime sleepiness and brain fog. And the medical advisory board for the app company came back and were a little bit unsure about this and said, well, why brain fog? That's not even really listed in the symptoms. I know, we did this thing with the FDA. This is really a patient-forward thinking problem that patients are really concerned about. I haven't really heard of anyone else working on this issue yet, but I hope we can get researchers more involved. Again, this meeting with the FDA was a patients-focused meeting, but doctors weren't invited. Other people weren't invited, so we had a conversation with the FDA, but not everyone was in the room. I hear a lot of people talking about patient-focusedness and patient-centeredness and all these different buzzwords, right? And I see images like this one, and I honestly get scared. These are people on different little islands. They're siloed, they're stereotyped, and they're generalizations. Really, this is really not how our healthcare landscape is, if you ask me. Patients can be providers. Patients can be caregivers. And I think this landscape shouldn't be something that scares us. We should be excited because we have a lot to learn from each other. I've read a book called Patient Fanatics, which calls patients unsophisticated healthcare customers. I've been in lectures like this where someone has said, she didn't even look like a patient. What does it mean to look like a patient? Do I look like a patient that takes medication twice a night and once a day? So I think we really have to think about the way that we converse with each other and have mutual respect and mutual responsibility. I love now that I've learned that I'm an e-patient is a new term that I'm embracing. It means an empowered and educated patient. That I take my healthcare into my own hands and I'm an equal partner in making decisions about my healthcare. And if you're not familiar with the e-patient movement yet, I hope you will be soon. It's a really wonderful community of people that are advancing healthcare as a partner with other people. Well, I have to admit, though, when I was first diagnosed, if you go back to 9 years now, I didn't really have an interest in being part of any sort of a patient community or e-patient or any of this. In fact, my dad and my stepmom dragged me to a national patient conference for narcolepsy. I did not want to go. I don't know what I thought these people would be like, but I thought they would be weird or different. And I was really startled when I went to this first conference that narcolepsy was normal for one weekend. All these things that were so weird to everyone else, people were like, oh yeah, yep. And it was a really awesome experience. I wanted to read a short passage from my book to describe a little bit about this conference. On Sunday morning, Dad came into my hotel room to talk over the logistics of the conference and the drive home. He turned to leave, and then he stopped at the door and walked back towards me. Had he forgotten something? I'm so proud of you, Jules. He opened his arms to hug me, which was strange. He wasn't much of a hugger. He'd always been sort of the awkward dad, not the touchy-feely type. He hugged me tightly, and then his body began to shake, and I realized he was crying. Weeping, really. He convulsed in my arms. I'd never seen him cry, never mind felt him cry. I didn't want to hug anymore. It made me so sad. I'm so sorry, he repeated between sobs. It's okay, Dad. He finally let me go, and he sat on the edge of my bed, rocking back and forth and clasping his hands tightly. It was a place he'd seen me many times. He'd listened patiently to my hopeless sobs, most recently with the breakup. He'd sat next to me. I sat next to him on the bed, unsure what to say or do. I didn't understand before, but I get it now, he finally said. It's much worse than I realized. Funny, I thought he'd understood my narcolepsy better than anyone else, but now he thought he got it. It's not your fault, I said. But it's not fair, you're so young. It's gonna be okay, Daddy. This was a white lie, and we both knew it, but what else could I say? Eventually, he calmed down, and he left. I looked around the bare hotel room and finished folding my clothes into my suitcase in silence. The conference had had a big effect on my dad, perhaps bigger than it had on me. Now he held his own burden, to love someone deeply, his youngest child, his fabulous Jules, and watch her navigate a serious illness. He'd always been my knight in shining armor, helping me through all my lowest points, but he couldn't save me from narcolepsy. So it was really hard to see him so upset, but at the same time, it helped to know that I was carrying this burden with someone else. I also had a great therapist. I didn't get the therapist because I had narcolepsy. I actually got it when I didn't know I had narcolepsy. I thought I might have depression. I didn't feel depressed, I felt tired, but I went to meet this therapist once before I found the word narcolepsy, and then I kept her for the next 2 years, and she was a big part of my support system. I eventually found other support groups online and in person, and I can credit a lot of my best treatment decisions to hearing the feedback of other patients. Finally, when I published my book, I really thought I was trying to reach other people, not people with narcolepsy necessarily, but I was startled to get responses from people with narcolepsy all over the world, saying that when they read my book for the first time, they didn't feel alone. I knew they weren't alone because I was receiving all these emails, but why is it that everyone felt so isolated in their environment? I started to realize that this idea of social stigma or misunderstanding was a prominent recurrence in these emails, that no matter how terrifying and scary all the different symptoms were, what people most want to talk about was how their brother didn't understand or their mom just didn't seem to get it. I think this is a really big deal, and I think social stigma should be listed on the list of symptoms so that everyone pays attention to it and how you treat people facing these conditions. Because the exciting thing is, we don't have a cure for the disease, but we have a cure for the loneliness today. This is why I started the Narcolepsy Not Alone campaign. Because with 1 in every 2,000 people living with narcolepsy around the world, they really just shouldn't feel alone. I want to introduce you to some of my friends. This is Nils Emil from Sweden, and Connor and Colin from Mississippi. This is Debbie from Maryland. This is Mo from Dubai, Adam from Australia, Alexander from Ireland, and Katie from Australia. Jessica from Oklahoma. Sammy from France, Sarah from California, Maria from Spain, Anise from France, Diane from Texas, Emily from Sweden, myself, my friend Danielle, and her dog Rolo at a conference in Denver, and Stephen and Jenny, North Carolina, and Cyan in Korea. This is Devin in Wisconsin. This is Lindsay in Canada, Kevin in Virginia, Berriman and Eric in Virginia, and Chloe in Scotland. Debbie and Nancy in Iowa. These are people at conferences and support groups around the world, including UK, Australia, Kansas City, Ohio, Ireland, United States, Spain, and my support group in Los Angeles, California. We have collected over 1,400 photos from all 50 US states and 48 countries around the world. Yet when I speak to doctors about the importance of social support, I honestly feel the eyes glaze over, and I don't think they quite get it. So let me be clear. I believe that if you're not talking to your patients about the importance of social support, you are making a medical error. Patients, you can help patients find these connections. You can prescribe me. You can prescribe other patients living with chronic conditions. You can prescribe online support groups and advocacy organizations. In closing, I just want to invite you to be my co-explorer. I want us to help innovate healthcare and build a more beautiful future. But I think it's going to take the highest of technology and the lowest of technology, the most strategic of systems and the messiest of human emotions. And it's going to be not for patients, but with patients. So on behalf of the 1 in every 2,000 people around the world with narcolepsy, thank you for listening to my story.